Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we're going to look at Unit 4.5, Maritime Empires Maintained and Developed, Causes and Events from 1450 to 1750, with a few thematic overlaps with this one here. So our governance learning objective is explain how rulers employed economic strategies to consolidate and maintain power throughout the period. So we'll be looking a little bit at mercantilism, right, to address that standard. In that learning objective. Economic systems explain the continuities and changes in networks of exchange from 1450 to 1750. So we'll go from state-sponsored economic activity to, joint stock companies and explain, what remained the same and what changed during this period. And then socially, we'll continue to look at, cultural factors. And we'll actually begin with that today by continuing wrapping up our look at syncretism and religion today. Right? And so this is another complex set of historical developments and examples, right, that overlap here. Right, so this is where some of our cultural syncretism comes in. All right, so sort of wrap up with Latin America, for this unit. So all the new contact between people gets divided, led Spain to divide the law into two different legal systems. So a legal system that was applicable for the Republic de Indios, Native American communities overseen by priests and royal representatives, and then the Republic de Españoles, right? So Spaniards and their African slaves, right? So, with such a vast colonial holdings, they decided to treat things differently. Right, with a rationale as Native Americans are, especially after you get by that encomienda phase within that first 50 years of colonization, Native Americans get treated differently than enslaved Africans, which become a prominent feature within the plantation aspect of the hacienda system. All right, so let's kind of do a little syncretism and religion. So what we did in class today as a starter is identify examples of syncretism from this image. All right, so feel free to pause and look at this and try to come up with one or two examples of syncretism. All right, so hopefully you're able to identify a couple of things. Probably the first thing that students look at is this. And some are unable to identify this. I simply, when they ask, I tell them this is cuy. That's C-U-Y. That's the word to describe what it is in Peru. That usually does not answer their question. So then I'll show them this. All right. So you might be more familiar with this by the term guinea pig, right? And of course, it is, keep in mind there are not large domesticated animals that live in Latin America before the arrival of Columbus, and of course, Peru in the Andes is not not the best pasture land in the world. So, large scale ranching will not become a thing in the 1800s there, like it does in other places, like in Argentina and in the Mato Grosso and in Brazil. So so this will remain, right, a continuity for the food supply, right? So, and obviously today, frying is a more modern way to serve it. More rotisserie style, which is what this would be a more traditional way, right? Grilling, I guess, would be a more traditional way as well, right? So that's one example, right? One thing that people identify. The second thing people usually identify is like this. You see the corn, right? You can see corn, being displayed here as well, right? So a little Columbian exchange, knowledge goes a long way. All right, so then we kind of transition to this one, right? Can you identify any examples of syncretism in this, right? And this is a bit more of a challenging one, right? This one isn't quite so obvious. So, so generally, we'll look at this and we don't really get much initially. So we usually kind of start by, can you identify like what this, and this are, right? And hopefully you can identify this as the Trinity. So that being said, then what do we see here? right? And this is usually when a student will chime in and say, oh, this is a mountain, right? This is a mountain, and you're seeing Mary being kind of imposed within that mountain, right? So you're seeing that syncretism between, the worshiping of nature and the mountains in the Andes with the mother goddess, that we see kind of so often transplanted within early Latin American Christianity, Mary. All right, so that's kind of an obvious example. Then, once a student says that, then they'll kind of pick up on, oh, that might be Inti, right? So the sun god, the moon god, gender parallelism comes back, from a homework back from Unit 1, and then we repeated that in Unit 3. So hopefully those kind of ring a bell. Every once in a while, I'll have a student who would have watched, one of my home videos that I have on my channel, and they might pick up on that red, right? So I guess what I'm referring to here is this video here, right? So that reddish color that we see, that we kind of often associate with this. So if you haven't seen this, so I was, when I was in Peru a decade ago, I'd gone to a textile making place, and they showed us like where they get their colors from, right? Where their colors come from, and yeah, so they showed us that, and so a lot of it's roots and flowers, but the red comes from an insect that lives on the cactus, they said. So they'll use that, to get that vibrant red. Then they put a little lime on it, and the gentleman told us adding the lime to it will help lock that color into the alpaca fabric that they were using, at that facility, which is kind of interesting. And then they told us a story. I don't know if it's true or not, but she said that because they didn't have a lot of money as teenagers, they would use that as cosmetics right before they went out on dates. So yeah, I don't know if they were spoofing the Taurus or not, but she played along nicely with that story. All right. All right. So yeah. So that red you could use as another example. Because traditionally Mary is not portrayed wearing red; she's portrayed wearing blue, right? So the red is is an adaptation for the Andes, right? All right, so yeah, so then from there we just kind of moved on and just looked at, what is the reality of the forced conversion of Christianity in Latin America. So, when we talk about conversion or the spreading of Christianity, what goes on in the Indian Ocean is very different than what goes on in the Americas, right? So we've talked before about like the Jesuits going to China or in Japan, and you see attempts at conversion there, and some success in Japan, and then some the Tokugawa shogunate will kind of turn that around. Even before the Tokugawa, Hideyoshi actually kind of turns that around, right? And then it formally happens under the Tokugawa shogunate. So we talk about conversion of Christianity. There is nothing left to chance in the case of the Americas, right? This is a forced conversion, right, situation. So, please pause and read through these, and just kind of make sure you understand that in places that were under colonial authority, the Inquisition was present in Spanish Latin America and in Portuguese Latin America. The Inquisition was present and practicing the religion and getting caught practicing indigenous religions was outlawed. Right, and of course, if you're talking about who is doing this forced conversion, in the major cities, Mexico City and Caracas and Lima and Santiago and Buenos Aires, in these major Spanish cities, the church would have been present. There were cathedrals and the church was there, but in the periphery, the process of conversion, was largely facilitated by monastic groups such as the Dominicans, the Franciscans, and the Jesuits. So you do have some kind of examples of syncretism that is used to actually resist this, right? So the Tikionkoi example is one example of using elements of Christianity to resist forced conversion to Christianity. And we also see this, especially in places that were not that well controlled by Spanish authorities, like in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Belize. All right. So one kind of last example is that I talked about in class of syncretism is I kind of just point out that it's still around today. This is a video that was made by the BBC back in 2014. So in class we watched kind of a little bit more because it's kind of following this 15-year-old kid, so he's your age, and but we watch we watch kind of a little bit just looking at the job that he does. This is in Potosi, right? This is at Potosi, that famous silver mine in what is today Bolivia, and here they're gonna show you an example of syncretism. So we're gonna watch just I guess about a minute or so of this video. All right.
He wanted to show me what keeps the miners safe. It wasn't what I was expecting. This is LTO.
Tiene cuerpos porque esta vez es exactamente el diablo, ¿no? Es el diablo. No de las profundidades, ¿no? Normalmente aquí los mineros nos reunimos los días viernes para darle un poquito de coca y alcohol al tío, ¿no? Eso es un agradecimiento porque nos ha dado mucho mineral, trabajo y también para que nos cuiden, ¿no? De los accidentes que pasan en las minas. Fuera de la mina, son ahí católicos cristianos, ¿no? Y echando dentro de la mina, ya van más al diablo, ¿no?
That's normal?
Sí, dentro de las minas viven el diablo.
Right, and that little phrase there, right there. I mean, I think that kind of is kind of a good way to look at religious syncretism and religious conversion to Christianity during the Spanish colonial period in the places that were within sight of the church. They practiced Roman Catholicism, whereas on the periphery, where they could not see, indigenous beliefs were continued and then syncretized. And you're seeing here a clear example of syncretism. So a mountain god that is being worshipped, but you're using Christian terminology to describe, right, that deity. So, right, syncretism. All right. So then we kind of transition to these joint stock companies. Kind of a last little reminder about the kind of that first wave Portuguese interaction and conflicts, the Omani Portuguese rivalry, the Omani European rivalry. This is about controlling of trade, right? And then I guess this is that last vestige of state-sponsored trade, right? Before we make that transition to joint stock companies, right? So your homework from last night, you read about two of these companies. So we kind of start just by identifying what are those companies and where are they located, where are they centered. So obviously, you had a homework about the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, and right, so the VOC, Dutch East India Company, and also the British East India Company. Right, so right here, the British East India Company. So where do we start today is where are they from? Right, so where's the corporate headquarters of the British East India Company? Where's the corporate headquarters of the VOC? So we start there, and right, and then obviously London and Amsterdam, and then I ask like what is right? So what city is this? If they can't get that without a hint, most kids are able to identify that this is in Amsterdam. If that picture doesn't work, then this does, right? And Amsterdam is the kind of quintessential merchant city, right? So it is one of the original members of the Hanseatic League, and will evolve, and grow as a trade city. And you see these canals all through the city are. So that merchants can bring their goods right to their back of their warehouses, and then on the street side, the front side, you'll have the storefronts there, right? And of course, you live above, right, up above. So I mean, this city is literally designed as a merchant trade city. So right, so I asked once we establish Amsterdam, I will tell students that this is this particular vista of the city of Amsterdam is where people, who owned the British West India Company lived. So where did the money come from to build these beautiful buildings, right? But where did the money come from to do that? Where what kind of things did the British West, right? The Dutch West India Company do based on this map, right? So students will kind of look at this and hopefully you can come up with a claim, right? So kind of take a moment and look at this and try to develop a claim where how the British West India Company made their money. Right, so hopefully you can figure out that these are colonies, like Curacao, for example. So they had Caribbean colonies, and in South America, right? They have a presence in South America as well. So what do we know about these colonies? We know that colonies like in Mexico, like New Spain, and in the Andes, the raw materials that were being exploited was silver, while in the Caribbean, in this part of the world, these are plantation economics, right? So what kind of goods did they produce? Like, where did they generate their wealth from, right? So when their ships were coming from here to Europe, what were they laden with? The obvious answer is sugar cane, right? Or sugar. So sugar and what else? Maybe coffee later on, right? Coffee plantations. So sugar and coffee is what's coming. So then what happens to these boats before they go back to the Americas? Where do they go? Yes, they become part of the slave trade. So where does the money come from? To build these fabulous houses. This is the British West Indies Company wealth is being generated from plantation economics and the slave trade within the Atlantic system. All right. So that's them, right? But that's not even what you read about, all right? And so all of this wealth has nothing to do with the wealth associated with the VOC, right? The Dutch East India Company, right? And right, so when you kind of look at the Dutch East India Company, how big were they? I mean, they're massive. So this was from a couple of years ago, like just pre 2020, right? So how big were they? You look at the valuation of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, at its peak in 1637. Its valuation was adjusted for inflation. Its valuation was the same as all of these other corporations combined. All right. And in class, I usually kind of answer a couple questions about like who these, what these companies do, because there might be some that you're not familiar with. And of course, today that doesn't exist anymore under that name. Now it's Meta, right? All right. So and this is just another infographic. This looks at the kind of most wealthy companies, ever to exist. And so the Dutch East India Company, stands alone as the most valuable company ever to exist in all of human history. A lot of these you may not be familiar with, but most of you guys are probably familiar with Rockefeller and Standard Oil Company, or Bill Gates and Microsoft, before they were broken up. So like, Microsoft today as a shell of what it used to be, before the antitrust laws were kicked in, and it was divided. All right. This is just another infographic way of looking at just how wealthy they were. All right. So Apple, if you are familiar with Apple, which I know you are. All right. So in your homework about the Dutch East India Company, you read that there's some similarities to be made with Portugal and how Portugal got its start with the VOC. So they both got their start. So there's a similarity comparison you could draw. They both got their start by being involved in the carrying trade. So they were ferrying goods from one port to another. And of course, they do get a monopoly as well in Japan, right? So in Nagasaki. And then also, like Portugal, they'll eventually get involved in plantation economics. So, Portugal does so in Brazil. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, will do so in what is today Indonesia. Right? So they will eventually take over this land. I think that's your tonight's homework, right? Kind of reading about how that process went. And, and then and then they will eventually, that'll become a crown colony eventually, where it will remain under Dutch control until World War II, and the Japanese will occupy it, and then the Dutch will get it back for a couple more years, and then I think it's 49, they eventually release it, right, and allow self-rule. All right, and then this is just kind of looking at their value over time, right? So this is a couple hundred years almost, right, that they exist. All right, so this is just more in case kids ask. I will show this sometimes, but I don't really spend time in class. But you're welcome to pause on this if you want. But mostly, I just kind of want to show where Amsterdam is. So Amsterdam is in Holland. Holland is in the Netherlands. All right, so just to kind of make sure you are aware of this. And of course, if you don't know where the word VOC comes from, right, the V means Dutch, the O means East, right, East. So Dutch East India Company is the English translation of Dutch, right? So, all right, and you're welcome to pause and read through all this stuff. I don't show that video clip in class anymore, but it talks about the tulip craze. And I'll put a video link to that video in there if you want to watch that. All right, so as far as the rise of them in the Indian Ocean, they are a fabulously wealthy company, and you see their corporate headquarters here. All right, and of course, over time, their returns were phenomenal, right? So they will average over 200 years at 18% annual return. A $1 investment in 1602, when the company comes to an end, would have been worth $237,903,845,036,819.84, right? That is a fabulous return on investment. Right, and if you know anything about investments, 18% annual over a 200-year period is a shocking kind of number, right? And like the British East India Company, they will fight wars, they will rule over land, they will coin their own money. They are kind of that example, like the British East India Company, of a corporation that will function as a government in places that it occupies. All right. So let's kind of transition over to the BEIC, the British East India Company. You can see here kind of where they were, where they operated, right? And of course, this is the kind of introduction to the story of colonialism. Second wave colonialism or imperialism in South Asia, right? So how the Mughals eventually are overthrown, through a combination of Marathans and British East India Company, and then the eventual complete takeover of the British East India Company lands by the Crown in the 1860s. All right. So once again, just for terminology purposes, I do like to show this, just because we throw around terms like England, Great Britain, UK, quite a bit. So if you kind of didn't know the differences between, this is a nice infographic. All right. And so when you talk about the rise of the British Empire, where the sun never sets, right, eventually, they're also going to start, like Portugal, as state-sponsored expeditions. Then you see some piracy, or, I guess one country's privateering is another piracy, right? So if you're Spanish, Drake is a pirate. If you're British, then he's a privateer, right? But, this will change, and things will change in 1600 with the rise of joint stock companies. So in 1600, we're going to see, we will see, the beginnings of this joint stock movement, and this is like that true growth of the British as an empire from this point on. So British East India Company profits, right, will surpass, right, DEITC's, the Dutch East India Trading Company's profits by 1720, right? So over time, their profits will surpass, right? But their overall valuation never peaks as high as the VOC. Right. So once we see these joint stock companies, then we start to see the spreading of these, of the influence of these. So Jamestown, that's the Virginia company. Think about the Mayflower and the first Thanksgiving story that you're told as a child. That's the Massachusetts Bay Company there, right? And of course, there are also, you see these trading companies involved in the Atlantic slave trade. So the Royal African Company, right? Granted, royal monopolies. So they are heavily involved, right? These early trading companies and the British are, give rise to the Atlantic system. And of course, this is it's an interesting kind of hybrid going on at this time in history. So let's just kind of take a moment real quick and make sure we understand some terminology. All right, so I'm going to talk about mercantilism real quick. All right, so feel free to, I'm just going to keep this on for a second. So if you want to read through this, go ahead and pause, and then I'm going to summarize this for you like I do in class, right? So, all right, what is mercantilism? I don't like talking about mercantilism a lot in class, just because I know you've already had this in like 4th grade, and then you learn about it again in like 8th grade, all right? So, but let's just kind of make sure you understand, just to kind of make sure that you don't miss out on this, right? So you have mercantilism. Right, and this is an economic system, right? And and as far as how it works, there's a couple of basic things that you need to make sure you understand about mercantilism. Colonies exist, right, for the benefit of the crown, all right, or the mother country. Right? That is the only reason why colonies exist. Right? So if we were to do, for example, right? For example, let's take the Virginia Company, right? So the colony of Virginia. Right, what are they kind of largely initially doing in there? Right, they're growing tobacco. The colony of Virginia could only buy goods from England. Right, and of course, colony of Virginia. Again, this is a tobacco growing, could only sell goods to England. Which means if I was a buyer for someone like Louis XIV and I wanted to buy tobacco, I couldn't take my ship and go from Saint Domingue or Haiti up to Virginia to sell some sugar to get some tobacco. That would violate the rules of mercantilism, technically speaking. All right. So when we're talking about mercantilism, these are the basic rules. All right. And just kind of talking about this a little bit more, right? The way that this is done, right, is you exploit, OIT, right? You exploit raw materials of colonies. That's how it gets done, right? So, silver, in the case of Mexico, that's New Spain, right? Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, right? So silver in the Andes and in Mexico, in the soil, in most other places, right? So in the case of the Virginia Company, the growing of tobacco is exploitation of the soil. Brazil, sugarcane, exploitation of the soil, right? So sugar, coffee, tobacco, right? That's what you're kind of initially doing right down there. All right, so that's kind of basic mercantilism, right? And so while this is going on, right, you simultaneously have these joint stock companies, right? And so mercantilism will grow, kind of simultaneously with these companies, and of course at some point the mother countries are going to lose control, or at least allow them to kind of develop and run their own thing. All right, and there's a word for that too. All right, so when you kind of look at this triangle trade, as it's sometimes referred to as, these raw materials that were being exploited were going from the Americas to Europe, to wherever their colonies were, and then from there some would just go back to the Americas, but many would come down and kind of make that Africa pickup run, right, and then head back. With enslaved Africans, right? That middle passage. So you see this kind of triangle trade on this situation here, right. So as this is developing, right, you also have, right, let's kind of do this on here, but simultaneously with this, we're seeing these joint stock companies rise. All right, so joint stock companies, right, and there's so many of them there, and what we're seeing here is, right, these companies begin to grow, right, at a rate that, if you're talking about syncretism of religion and what people do in front of authorities versus what they do on the side, smuggling operations become as profitable as as legitimate operations do, and maybe sometimes these smugglers are going to start paying off local authorities. And there's an actual word for this in American colonial history, right? Salutary neglect. So joint stock companies will rise up following the rules of mercantilism, right? So these companies will rise up following these rules, but salutary neglect will become a prominent feature in some of these colonies, such as the British colonies in North America, specifically the 13 colonies, right? Some of these smuggling operations, what starts as some will become many. And, I guess, this thing kind of kicks off, it's one thing to acknowledge that blind eyes are being turned, but by the 1730s, it's, at this point, it's a known secret, that salutary neglect exists. So as long as bribes are paid, as long as tax revenue will be coming in and people's pockets are being lined, then you will be allowed to start trading with whoever you want, right? And you'll see half-hearted attempts by the British to rein this in, but, like the Molasses Act. It's not a legitimate attempt, and so from the early 1700s on until the mid 1700s, you will see, joint stock companies evolving into something new. So by the time you get to the mid 1700s, you're really talking about proto-capitalism, right? So, and this has everything to do with salutary neglect. Right, so the beginnings of this are happening. And this is not state-sponsored. This is organic. It simply happens. When the government steps out of the way and allows this thing to purely develop. And the thing about capitalism, right, is unlike mercantilism, it's not purely focused on the exploitation of one over the other. This is an economic system that is founded on this idea of mutual benefit. All right, both sides have to agree in order to make a transaction. Right, so it's a very different kind of economic system that will eventually evolve out of this because of salutary neglect, because the government steps out of the way. And of course, most of you know this already because this is the story of the American Revolution. After the 7 Years' War, or in North America, the French and Indian War, the British are going to need to raise tax revenue, and they're going to try to put their foot down on salutary neglect, and they're going to try to reimpose mercantilism again. And of course, that is not going to go over well, right? So this becomes one of the fundamental causes of the American Revolution, right? So the American Revolution, right, is a story you're all familiar with. So you kind of know about this story of the evolution of mercantilism to capitalism, and and how that fits into the American Revolution. All right. So and of course, lastly, Louis XIV, the rise of Louis XIV. What pays for Versailles, right? What pays for this fabulously, a beautiful palace? It's and of course, the answer is colonies, right? So soft gold in Canada, and of course, the richest of all of the colonies is Saint Domingue, right? So Haiti, and so we've talked about this a little bit already. We also talked about maroon communities that exist in Haiti, which then give rise to syncretism, such as voodoo, right? So yes. So, and I think in some classes I showed this little video about Canada. This was created by the Canadian government. I'll see if I can find that and put that on on that YouTube page as well for you if you want to watch that. All right, and then of course, so lastly, if you're talking about the Dutch East India Company, right, the rise of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, these trading companies, by the time you get into the 1600s, the Portuguese monopoly, the Portuguese trade post empire monopoly has been broken, and you will see, by 1600, by the first decade of 1600, formal relationships between the Mughals and the British East India Company being established, and then the French will follow suit, right? So you kind of see this kind of given rise. So we see in the 1600s a massive influx of wealth coming into South Asia, as part of this kind of increased interconnectedness between the Americans and the Indian Ocean trade world. All right, so we actually do watch, time permitting, we watch, about 5 or 6 minutes, I guess, of this, and I'll try to put a link for this on my webpage if I remember to. And we started at 37 minutes and watched to about 44. And what it's about, this little segment here, is about how the Taj, or why the Taj Mahal was built, and kind of the connection between silver coming out of the Americas being mined by Spanish Mita, how that silver will flood its way into South Asia to buy things, right? So South Asia was the textile center, right, of the world at this time in history. So South Asia, the Mughals will become fabulously wealthy because of their interactions with these trade companies and the silver coming in from the Americas, right? So, and of course, that wealth will then be used to pay for the Taj Mahal. So that connection gets made in that little video clip. So we watch that, and that usually wraps up class. All right, so key takeaways. An expansion of European maritime empires impacting nearly every region of the world, right? Kind of interconnectedness, and then the rise of joint stock companies during this period will alter the balance of global trade and power, and this topic is the contextual reality for the next couple of units. So it would be wise to make sure you really understand this. All right, that is all for today. Sapriati.